So we're going to be doing the second part of our RCM 101 training. So Cass, just go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so we are going to be covering today. So I'm going to start off by going through community maturation. So it sounds fancy and it's like planning, thinking about where your community is and planning for what you want to do in your community. Then Cass is going to go through community management, so different strategies. Hopefully we'll have a bit of time to do some next steps prioritization. And yeah, and then we'll wrap up. So we've actually got sort of 3 different activities. So a bit of talking, a bit of activities all the way through this one. Okay, let's get going. So we're starting with community maturation. So if we think about communities, they have or should have a purpose, sometimes called a mission or a vision. Okay, hopefully this is something that has been developed with the community or with the initial community group sometimes, which can be a few people that then expands into a much bigger community. And this purpose really does define how you want your community members to interact with you and with each other. So it defines the participation that you want to achieve within your community. What you also need to consider is that interactions do happen within your community just naturally. So if you don't plan for the participation that you want, people are going to do stuff. Okay. Oh, okay. Not formatted well. No, keep going back to that one, back again. So what we think of the job of the research community manager or the person who is doing the community management work or people, if it's distributed, their role really is to scaffold and facilitate and empower for this desired level of participation. So remember, participation linked to the vision, what you want to get done in your community. And I think I said about this last time, I personally feel that a job of a community manager is really to keep the community in line with their agreed purpose. So to be this caretaker of the shared vision. So this can be through making the purpose really explicit in documentation to create this shared understanding across the community so that all community members have access to that information. So that kind of sharing of knowledge or democratization of knowledge across the community. And then also the community manager's job is to regularly make the community come back to that vision, to reinforce it in the community. Or it might be their job to raise questions in the community about them moving away naturally from that shared vision and whether actually that is what they want as a community. Maybe they've come to a point in the community where they need to think again about their vision. Maybe they've achieved it partly and they need to think again and change their vision. And that often happens in communities, that you've achieved something or you found out some information and the vision needs to change. And so then your participation needs to change. So really, generally, communities start off with less complex participation, but build in complexity as they get more established or larger. Those aren't necessarily the same thing. And also they need more complex participation communities as they go through. So for us to kind of think about how what this looks like in a community, we've over time we've kind of built this what we're calling a community maturation indicator. And this is what we are used to kind of think about where your community is and where you want your community to go and how you kind of get there. So it's like a planning tool in a way, an understanding and planning tool is what I would say it is. So I'm going to explain this in a bit more detail. Next one, please, Cass. So I'm going to start with the levels of participation. So there are 6 different levels in our indicator. So starting on the left-hand side, so informing community, it being the least complex type of participation, and then building up in level of complexity as we go to the right, which is the very decentralized power on the right-hand side. Keep going to the next one, please, Cass. So just to explain this a little bit more and give it a little bit more depth. So the complexity of potential problems and community members involved in solving problems, it increases from the left to the right. So you need more increases in the amount of people, the complexity that is needed. And then the scope of participation, so the ways in which people actually contribute to the community, the diversity of participation, because you've got more people in there, and the collaboration, the amount of collaboration to solve the problem, it kind of improves or increases as you go from the left to the right. So really what you're thinking about is increasing co-creation is what you're trying to do. So you're trying to do more things with the community as you're going from the left to the right. And it becomes more, that generally becomes more complex. It involves more people, becomes more complex. Also channels for engagement. Infrastructure requirements and needs for resourcing also increase from the left to the right. So with more complexity, it really takes more time to do things, and it also takes more people, so more people resource to actually make it happen. And then also people's involvement in the community building, the maintenance and sustainability increases. So you essentially need more people to run the community, to be community managers in the community. And so it really means that as you're going from the left to the right, you have to start empowering more people to actually be community managers or community leaders within this community. And then finally, the levels of participation can be used to establish and improve objectives. So the community may have initial goals, but then these might be achieved after a few years. And so actually then you might want to build on those in subsequent years. And actually that in itself brings more complexity or more need of complexity and participation within the community. So for an example of that, I could say from the Turing Way, we have got like an overall mission, but actually over time of that community, because it's been going about 6 or 7 years now, there are kind of like subvisions. And so we have working groups which do different parts of the work. So we have a community management working group. We have a infrastructure working group. We have a book dash, which is one of our regular events working group. So actually we've kind of got these subgroups within the community, which is building more complexity within the community, but essentially to get more things done in the community. So the community itself is bigger and more complex, and we need the community leadership to have the structure, which is more complex as well. Okay, next one. So this one is just a bit of an example of what these different stage or levels of participation kind of mean. So, so informing, really, that's where the community has a one-way communication channel. So that could be a newsletter, it could be a web page, something like that. It could be some sort of social media post. So you are sending out information to the community rather than it coming back, rather it being bi-directional. The second level there, inviting feedback, is where you're actually asking for opinions. So, so again, that is not like a consistent dialogue that you're creating, but it is you're receiving feedback and you're probably actioning that feedback from the community. And then the third level is about this kind of bi-directional, actually really having conversations with the community and more involvement with the community, is engaging and involving them. So supporting more collaboration. So you might have things like co-working sessions, collaboration cafes, things like that, more shared practices, combining ideas. So starting more co-creation within the community. And then mobilizing and connecting. So this is where you've got different groups. So this might be the starting of your subgroups within the community to undertake different tasks and activities, just as I was saying within the Turing Way. So mobilizing and connecting them, and then empowering groups. So this is where you're really the groups are connected to support each other, share solutions. So really starting to have leaders of these groups. And I think this is probably empowering groups is probably where the Turing Way is at the moment. We've got quite a good governance structure, which moves people from the working groups up into the steering group, which is this kind of leading decision making. Well, actually not decision making, because we have community decision making, but it is the sort of group that steers the community. So we've got these like empowered groups and leaders within the community. And then the decentralized power. So this is where the groups actually can start to work on their own. Often you might have spin-offs or things like that. So often communities, that's quite hard place to get because it takes so much resourcing. So Cass, you had a good example of what decentralized power was. Did you talk about political groups, didn't you, to me last week?
Yes,
What's your
the
example?
Occupy movement.
Okay.
So
What tell
kind
us
of
about that? Yeah.
um, so a single mission to address issues around capitalism by occupying physical spaces of control and power. Um, but essentially, any group could do whatever they wanted to an
Yeah.
extent. Um, Not often something that we get in academia.
Yes. Yeah, giving over power is it's sort of having a mission, but giving over power to them. I do think you're right about political groups, particularly. I think that's a sort of like there's a cause, and then you have these different groups that kind of go up. Yes, we got a hand up.
Yeah, I was thinking that maybe not to that extent, but the RLA Plus communities are kind of that way. So we have a global organization, a group that maintains some infrastructure, but after that, the local chapters are very autonomous and independent in the way
Yeah,
they do things and all the activities and kind of the direction they want to take the
that's a
local
good
communities.
example. Yeah, that's a really good example. Yeah, thanks for that. That's a good one. Right, so I've done the first bit, the levels of participation. I'm going to go over the other axis now, which is the stages of community building. Next one. So we have got 6 of those, so 6 and 6, which is good. And so again, you're initially starting on the left and moving over to the right-hand side. So thinking about so this is really what sort of activities you're doing to move your community. So what things you're doing at that particular participation level. So you're basically doing the beginning bit, kind of saying initiating, that's it. So establishing what activities you need for that particular level. So thinking about planning the appropriate activities that would get you that level of participation. You should also think about identifying some sort of metrics, so success criteria at the design stage, so at the beginning, maybe that second stage, and then monitoring that as you're going along. So you can, come back and refine your activities. And it's also important really to think about being flexible and adaptive to change the community information, those metrics again, and kind of revisiting your plans and thinking how you can make them better. I always like to say that we plan activities, you never know how they're going to be received really initially when you're starting your community. It is a bit of a trial and error as a community manager. Sometimes you do events and nobody turns up. That's okay. You've found something out, and you probably will go and ask someone why that happened, and then feed that back into your plan. And that's a positive thing to do. But if you do a lot of planning with your community, that shouldn't happen so much, I would say. It will go a bit better. Next one, Cass. So just some examples there. So we've got initiation. So you're establishing your infrastructure, you're creating resources of shared information and communication about your project's goals and visions. So this could mean that at the very start of your community, or even starting a new phase of your community, where you need to revisit the community's goals. So thinking about communicating all of the time with the community members. And then the planning and design stage, this is where you're building stakeholder awareness plans. So you're building engagement plans, communication plans, all being prioritized to your objectives in the community. Could also mean things like stakeholder mapping to understand who you should be engaging with in your particular community, if you want to expand it particularly. And then implementation phase is really about starting to offer something to your community. So something collaborative. So it might be communication channels, like things like Slack and Teams and all of those. What's the new one? Zillip. Is that how you say it? Zillip? Yeah, Zillip.
Zulip,
Discord is a
like
bit
a
of an old
tulip.
Zulip. Oh, Zulip, like a tulip. Okay, I'll remember that now. Communication channels. So you might be running events, co-working. You might be running training like this. You might be engaging with them at other people's events, something like that. So the doing part of the engagement. And then you might go into like a growth phase. So you might want to be building on this implementation. So it might be that you need to scale up your knowledge exchange. So that might be through documentation. It might not be through engagement events. There might be skill building that needs to be done in the community so that you can start really building that community and getting further engagement. And then again, things like monitoring and evaluation. So thinking about that really throughout, actually. How have these activities gone? How can you refine your strategy? What events, how might you change your engagement strategy to get more engagement? What things might you stop doing? What new things do you need to do? So thinking about that all the way through. And then the last one, when you're thinking about you've done lots of stuff. You're thinking really when you're getting there, are you sustaining this community? Is it going well? Is it something that can keep sustaining? Is it something that needs to be closed, be sunset? Or is there other iterations of it? So, and that can be something that, you think of at the beginning stage, because there are communities that you build where it's going to be very short-lived type community, and that's fine. You are going to maybe sunset that and move on to the next thing, the next job as a community manager. But there are other communities that are very long lasting and they kind of keep going. Um, beyond the time that maybe you're working with them, they just keep going. So you have to think about the sustainability of the community once you have left as a community manager or once it's moved on to the next phase of the community. Right, next one, I think. Cass. So yeah, so our community maturation indicator has these two axes, the level of participation and also the stages of community building. We've got some, if you go to the next slide, Cass. We've got this one, which has got some examples. So these are just a few examples of what you can do in these different, if you kind of link them up, these different phases, these different levels of participations and the stages of community building. So these give you a few examples, but this is very limited, obviously, to one for each box. So there's lots of different examples of things that you can do. So if we just look at one of them, we've got here engage and involve. So really starting to get engagement in your community. You might start that by doing road mapping with your community, what they really want to be doing, and develop this stakeholder engagement process in the planning. You do lots of active engagement activities with them, and then involving the community in delivering their project objectives. So growing the community, getting their feedback, and impact data for the community, and then creating some sort of new leadership opportunities so you can move to the next phase and become, what's the next phase? I can't even remember. Oh, it's too small. Yeah, starting to mobilize the leaders at the end of that. So doing some planning around that to kind of move and make it more sustainable. Right. It's going to be over to you now.
So we're now going to look into managing your community, and as community managers, here we are managing our community. So there's different kind of aspects to this. Like I think managing your community is like a not usefully descriptive thing about what we're going to talk about at the moment. So we're going to look at a few different kind of activities that come as part of managing your community, which includes managing data about them, sort of like looking at engagement patterns and stuff. So first point is that we're going to be talking about and have mentioned stakeholder mapping, but as a term, stakeholder is colonial. There's a history associated with physically claiming land by putting a stake in the land, and because of its kind of colonial history, we're trying to move away from the use of that term broadly. It is, however, something that is still very widely understood. So kind of it would be great if you didn't realize these connotations around it. Next time you come into these conversations, you can kind of caveat with, we're using the term stakeholder because you know what that means, but really we're going to try and move away to other language, for example, interest holders or actors or something like that. So just a little side. So the reminder here is that your community are people, and you're designing for people. So in order to do that, you need to know who they are, right? I just moved my cameras around so I can see slides, so apologies for profile cast. So you need to know who your people are so you can anticipate their needs and respond to them. You need to understand where power is in your community, so you know who is influential and who can lend to support specific activities. You need to know who your people are so you can design inclusively for anything that you understand about them. So you need to know where people are so you can understand kind of geographical barriers to certain infrastructure choices, for example. It's also like one of my favorite bits about this work is knowing who to speak to when and who should speak to someone else, so who to connect to whom. So you can only know who to speak to if you know who's in your community, and you can only know who to connect when you know who's in your community. In some examples, this is information that you can hold in your head to an extent, but in other situations when you've got a growing community, this is data that you're unlikely to be able to manage by yourself. And if and when someone else has management responsibility for your community, then this data should be something that you can pass to them. I'm going to keep an eye on my slides, so Emma or anyone, if you want to shout me if questions or anything come up in the chat. Phew. So I'm going to talk about sort of three broad groups which probably fit most of the people in the communities that we're working with. You might have your project team. So imagine that this is a software tool or a methodology or something where there are a number of members who are kind of paid to develop and contribute to this work, this software. Then you could also consider your community to be the users of that tool and also potentially contributors to that tool. So you've got three different kind of segments here in your community. This is just an example of a community that's working with at Turing to sort of kind of show that there are many potential segments to your community. So here we were just thinking about like who has influence in the project along the x-axis, and then roughly the number of people there are in each segment. So our kind of most influential segment with only a few people were like the executive leadership team. And then you move out into kind of less influence, but a more number of people. So like moving into fellows and research assistants, and then like broader other people, anyone else in the universe who could be interested in this thing that we were doing at the time. Keeping an eye on these things like influence and the number of people is important to help plan your engagement and communication strategy. For example, you could put a lot of effort into managing the interests of people in the kind of further reaches because there's lots of them. But if they have low influence and you don't spend any resource working with the people of high influence, things can get slightly disjointed. So one of the ways that we look at or kind of gather this information about who's in our communities is by doing some kind of post-it note or loose kind of exercises where you define these clusters or segments of your community, for example, partners in your research, technical partners, external stakeholders, and you kind of name people under these different groups. And this is something that's really useful at the start of your project, again, so you can think about how you're going to work with these different people. But you can also reflect on it as your project goes. So you can see, are there any new groups in here that we should be connecting with that we aren't, for example? So this kind of work we've historically done in Miro, but it can be like you can lead a wonderful big team exercise and literally do it on post-its and get everyone's information. It's a nice way to kind of nice thing to do early on in a project to kind of frame your activities. This is another example of how Malvika's done this work previously with just like a spreadsheet. So you're collecting the names of people and you're assigning them to a specific like type. This is like the segment, and then collecting other information about them. And then I think that I've got one other example of how we do this, how we can do this in like a different format, but broadly what you're working towards with something like a spreadsheet when you move away from Miro is to something closer to a CRM, which is a client relationship manager system, which marketing agencies and other spaces use to like hold information about individual people in your community or in the space or network you're interested in. Now, the reason we're collecting all of this information is because we're trying to build kind of bridges for people to move between different segments if that's relevant to your work. So, for example, how can you turn your users into contributors, and how can you then make opportunities for your contributors to influence the project team? So, this is more of like a the connecting part of that diagram that we're looking at previously is like how can you build paths for people to communicate independently from you. So if you're the one that always has to bridge any conversation between your contributor and your project team, then you've positioned yourself as a bottleneck. So what are ways that you can allow the two to talk to each other without you having to be there as well? Now, assuming we've got all our lovely segments, and this was kind of like the graph with the Turing with the sort of quarter circles on it, it's useful to think about which of those segments or individual people have different levels of power and different levels of interest in the community. So there's a few resources out there about how to do this kind of mapping of power and interest. And when you can identify a person or a group as, for example, high power but low interest, you can decide what engagement you're going to do with them. So if someone has high power, but they're not too not particularly interested in the project, you just need to keep them satisfied, keep them happy with whatever requirements they're asking of you, whether it's reporting or KPIs or anything like that. If someone is very interested, but potentially not too influential, you can manage them differently. You might want to just make sure that they're regularly informed of the work, for example, with newsletters or other kind of outreach activities. Alternatively, if someone is high power and high interest, those are the people that you might need to manage more closely or kind of actively engage with in order to ensure that your project is continuing to deliver what's their kind of in their interest, that your project is serving their interests and making sure that you're aligned across those interests. So this is another example of, I think this is another one of Malvika's mappings of putting her segments or her groups of people into these different quadrants and then knowing who you're going to target with, where you're going to put your resources. Oh, and here's another one. Can I remember what this one is? I can't. But as you can see, it should be different for every project, really. This is an individual kind of project specific activity. And Oscar, while you were talking about your the fellows, I was thinking that there's even within communities, we've got different kind of missions. So this might be something that we want to do more than once. So that, for a specific part of the SSI mission, you might need to do this activity in one way and then do it again for a different activity. And the same, Adrian, for direct, there's the broad direct framework and how that wants to exist. And then there's the component of it that you've been talking about, which is the website updates. You've got kind of different things going on here. So this is all kind of your engagement strategy needs to fit whatever purpose you're considering or working on. This also helps you see where there's like gaps in your resourcing. So, for example, you might know that there's many, many users out there, but you just don't have the time to reach them. You just like when we looked in the skills exercise about like where can you draw resources from the community, it can be a great opportunity to develop leadership if you help, if other people can help engage those members. So, for example, if you're the person always onboarding, again, that introduces a bottleneck and you're missing an opportunity to allow someone else to do some onboarding. So, how can you, for example, get the contributors to help the users, or rather than you being always the person in between them? And this, we talked about, my brain is overlapping probably a number of different sessions on this, but did we talk about the mountain of engagement already with this cohort? Yes. Everyone's looking like, yeah, we kind of did. Oh yeah, we talked about the marketing funnel and things, didn't we? So um, those bridges that we've got between them, these can all be also considered as like your engagement pathways. Like instead of how are you going to turn a user into a contributor, how are you going to take someone from hearing about the project all the way to building on responsibility? So all of these, in the same way that Adrian is saying, you're thinking about all of these different things at the time. Again, you're thinking about all of these different things at the time. So turning a user into a contributor is also turning a first-time engager to a leadership responsibility. In your engagement kind of planning, thinking about converting people between segments, helping them meet, support each other, how to get more sustained and diverse leadership. You should also be thinking about the kind of values and behaviors that you want to create in your engagement activities. So this is we've got our kind of models of levels of participation, the green circles, and then this is another complementary one from the Mozilla um, like Mozilla framework of open practices. I didn't want to just read it out loud, but I'm just going to say it. The Mozilla framework of open practices, which are behaviors that you see within a community that you want to kind of amplify and reinforce. So if you when you observe these kinds of activities, it's like acknowledge them and also build them into your planning. So for example, keeping an eye out for when people are gifting each other information, creating together is this kind of co-working, like a broad aim for a lot of our groups is creating together. We also want to support people to give each other ideas, do active learning, and building around common interests. So this is just kind of to indicate that there are a few different kind of values that are useful to sustain in your community, and it's useful for you to think about what are the values that we want to reinforce in order to achieve our mission. So another community I'm working with, we just went through a long kind of really exciting set of work about what we are moving towards, and that very much emphasizes open and reproducibility. So we're trying to bring those open and reproducible values to everything that we do and every engagement that we have with the community, so we can kind of really reinforce that and give them an opportunity to learn through use of what it means to be open and reproducible. So very much a Turing Way type example is there as well. And then this is a piece of work that I did a couple of years ago, and I show it to absolutely everyone who ever meets me or listens. This is a map that I built of the environment sustainability community at Turing at the time, which was what I was using to hold all of that information that we just discussed. So people's levels of engagement, their amount of interest and power, but then also records that I had or we could find from desk research about who was connecting with who already, for example, by being collaborators on the same project. So I had a public version of this map, which is what you can see here and what you can get from the URL at the bottom. And the public one, no one is named on it unless they were consented, and we didn't get further than this. It was kind of a proof of concept. Then I also had an internal version where I had I had the names and I had their email addresses and their contact information, and I knew who was working on which projects. Um, a lot of it from open records, for example, GitHub contributors. And it was really useful to, for example, see where we had clusters of interest. So the red squares here are projects, and if I wanted to know who was working on which project and can make a connection between, person A and person B, I could look for where there were routes to connect them. For example, oh, this person at your institution is also working on this project. Why don't you speak to them? Or I could see, like, you can see like little purple triangles, which are institutions, and then lots of people around them, where I could see clusters of interest that helped me kind of get buy-in to say, like, we've got a lot of interest in this specific area of, this university is highly engaged with our work. We need to be doing something to support them, or we at least need to reach out and identify them. So this was like an internal kind of workflow process for me. For the public version, people really liked the idea of being able to position themselves within this community and see visualize themselves as a member of this space. And then for leadership, people really liked it that there was something kind of a tangible representation of a community that they could put on graphs and slides and things. And once the data is kind of managed in this way, then you can do some more sophisticated analytics with it rather than, for example, you can do graph network analytics and show changes over time and things like that. So we've got published a very brief proof of concept type documentation about this particular workflow in this tool, and then we're always looking for ways to develop it as well. So now we're going to do another little Miro activity. I'm just going to switch tabs to look at my timings, and here we are. So we're going to go back into the Miro board, and we're going to be thinking about where and how you're mapping your community. So have you done any work so far about who your community are and their needs are? Maybe have a think about which groups you need to know more about. So maybe have a lot of information about one segment, but less about another. And think about what kind of flows of information there already exist that don't need your help. And then conversely, where there's gaps. It can be useful to look at where engagement is happening easiest. For example, if you're already getting loads of engagement with a particular segment of folks, an institution or something, like recognize and value that and see what you can learn from that going forwards. And then I'm always thinking about this leadership pipeline. What opportunities are you creating for people to move up your mountain of engagement? Because that's just completely essential for sustainability of your community.
So we would, if we had more time, we would do another activity. So we'd give you more time for all of these activities, and you'd come away with an amazing plan for your community. But this is basically going to be your homework if this is a useful activity for you. So it's about what things you can take home from the workshop. So thinking about the activities we've done. So last time we thought about skills framework. So your skills in your communities, where there's some take homes there. The maturation indicator. What have you learned from that? What have you learned from the engagement questions that we've just done? So what we just want you to think about is like what are your takeaways, the things that you can maybe start implementing, and then thinking about what are you going to do next. So we've got this grid here, thinking about what could be your quick wins. So these are the things that you should think about prioritizing now. So for example, have you thought about there's someone in your community that has an amazing skill that you're not using. Could you contact them like this week? Could you get them to come and do something with you? Something like that. Are there also other sort of high impact but sort of slightly more high cost things? So things that maybe are longer term projects would go in the other box, where you can see my thing up there. And then are there some low impact things, maybe some low risk experiments that you can test over time? So these are the things where I said maybe you're thinking about doing some sort of event, but you're not really sure if people will come to it, but maybe it's a bit low risk, like you could do a smaller version of it and try it out. That would be fairly low risk. Maybe you've got a bit of time to do that. And then have a think about things that actually really you think they might be a good idea, but actually there might not be as much value in them, and actually they really drain your time. So you put them to the back of your list, really. So we're trying to get you to prioritize these kind of things that you've thought about in your community from the activities and kind of prioritize them. If we go to the next one, Cass, the next steps for your community. So once you've kind of prioritized those, it's obviously good to plan them out, have a bit of an action plan. So thinking about them, what you're going to do in 3 months' time. I think we've got the wrong dates on there, Cass. I've just realised. It says September 2025. We're going back in a time machine. I wish we were there.
Wouldn't that be nice?
3 months. So anyway, planning, thinking about 3 months, what you're doing in 3 months, up to the summer, 6 months, up to the end of the year, 12 months next year. What resources would be required for that? Who is accountable for the delivery? Hopefully it's not always you. Often in community work, it is you as the community manager or the community worker. How will I know when I've been successful? So this is about the metrics. So how are you gonna say you're successful? What's the metric on that? What are the biggest risks to it failing? So it's always good to have a bit of a think about the risks of something and how you might mitigate that. And then how are you going to mitigate the risk? Because there is risk in all the work you do in the community. Like I said, like you're planning something big, you want to ensure that you've thought about the risks of people attending the event. So you could mitigate that by not running your event in the summer holidays when people go on holiday, or on a religious holiday or something like that. Like if you planned an event on Christmas Day in the UK, you are not going to get many people coming to that event. So, there are certain mitigations that you can take to your risks. So that is your little bit or quite a lot of homework, but I think very useful just to kind of bring all of your take homes together and think about how you would plan that out.